And of course, this is our first week of Advent. Advent is this time where we look forward to the day where we celebrate the birth of our Savior Jesus. We look forward to Christmas. But Advent should also be a time, and I think far fewer of us do this, but Advent should be a time where we're looking ahead to the return of Jesus as well. Jesus came to earth, born as an infant, as every human being is born. Granted, he was not conceived in the way every human is conceived, but he was born the same way every human is born. And Jesus will come back to earth. He will come back the way he left. If you remember, he left by ascending into the clouds, ascending into heaven, and he will come back by descending from the clouds as well. That second coming could take place this week. It could take place in a few seconds. No, not yet. That's okay. We don't know when this is going to happen, but we know that it's going to happen at some point. Might be in our lifetime, it might be another 1,000 years, I don't know. But it's going to happen. Advent, while we celebrate the birth of Jesus during this time of Advent, we should also be reflecting on if we're prepared for his second coming, which we're all eagerly awaiting. During this season of Advent, we spend a lot of time reminiscing of past Christmases. We decorate, as I mentioned, we decorated last week. The church looks wonderful. Thank you again to all those that helped. I think next year we should go Clark Griswold on the outside of the building. Anybody? Might have to start about June, but just a thought. But we start to think about those Christmas traditions that we have. For me, growing up, Christmas Eve was always at Grandma and Grandpa Leon's house, my mom's parents. And they didn't have a real big house. And when I was thinking about this the other day, it's a fairly small house, and we crammed everybody in there together. Do you guys have a small house where you have a lot of family that comes together? So it was me and my sister, my two cousins, my mom and dad, my cousin's mom and dad, my other uncle, my grandparents, and for quite a while it was my dad's dad would come as well, only child. So there was 12 people crammed into this house where the turkey was being baked and all that wonderful kitchen smell. I remember it was always way too hot in there with this many people. But it's a lot of good memories. Growing up, my family had a nativity scene that we would set up every year. And there were a couple traditions we had with that. There was a Christian store in Fargo we would go most years, and my sister and I would get to pick out a new figure for our nativity scene. So we'd get a donkey or a camel or another shepherd or something like that, and we'd always do that every year. The other tradition that we had was the little baby Jesus manger the baby Jesus was separate from the manger. So Dad and Mom always made sure that we didn't put that little baby Jesus in there until Christmas morning. It was their way of reminding us, hey, this is what Christmas is about. It was a cool tradition that they had for us. When I started pastoring several years ago, sermon writing was a real struggle for me. I'm still usually finishing my notes Saturday night, to be perfectly honest with you, but my study throughout the week has gotten a little bit better. But I remember when Advent came around that first year, I had this great relief. Oh, I can relax a little bit. It's Christmas. That lasted about an eighth of a second. And I realized, oh no, it's Christmas. Everybody knows this story already. How am I going to add to it? But I do pray that this year you guys get to make some new memories with family and with friends. I pray that you remember those good memories from the years past that you have celebrated. We're going to start our season of Advent here with the story of Mary, the mother of Jesus. And what I'm going to say is definitely the Protestant view of Mary. So if you go to work tomorrow and you have a Catholic friend and you guys are talking about, well, what did you learn at church on Sunday? Oh, well, Pastor Mike told me this about Mary. They're going to look at you and they're going to go, he's really, really wrong. But I don't think I am. So we're going to go with that. For those that are unaware, Mary is very highly regarded in a lot of other denominations, specifically Roman Catholicism. And I know I've always wondered, and I know a lot of people have wondered too, where does that come from? Where is this veneration that it comes from? For Catholics, they're not going to say they worship Mary. God is worshipped, understandably. God is worshipped. Mary is venerated. To venerate someone or something is to think of them in really high esteem or to think very highly of that thing or that person. And I've always kind of wondered where that came from. And I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about where I believe that came from, because I came across a text about a year ago as I was studying for something else. It's called the Infancy Gospel of James, or the Proto-Gospel of James. Now, if you don't care about this, just tune me out for the next 5-10 minutes, because, I find it interesting. I find it fascinating, but if you're not going on Jeopardy next week, maybe this isn't necessary for you, because I am going to dig pretty deep into this for just a few minutes. It might be a little more than you expect. That's okay. There will not be a quiz after worship, so you can relax there. But I have a copy of this, what's called the Infancy Gospel, in another book in my office. The title of that book is Lost Scriptures. Lost Scriptures. And I don't really like the title of that book because none of it is Scripture and none of it is lost. It's just a really great way of selling a book. Hey, I found these lost Scriptures. They're not lost and they're not Scriptures. So in our Bible, in our Protestant Bible, how many books are in there? Does anybody know? 66. Yes, absolutely. There are 27 New Testament books and 39 Old Testament books. If you can remember there's 66 books, there's a really easy way to remember how many is in each. I just said how many is in the Old Testament, it's 39. If you want a really easy way to remember how many Old Testament books there are, how many letters are in the word old? 3. How many letters are in the word testament? It's 9, yes. T-E-S-T-A. Yes, 9. So Old Testament, 3 and 9, there's 39 books in the Old Testament. And if you can remember there's 66 total books, then you do some quick math, you can hopefully remember there's 27 books in the New Testament. The Roman Catholic Bible has a few more books than that. The Eastern Orthodox Bible has a few more beyond that. Which means at some point in history, people came together and said, these books over here are scriptural and are part of our Bible, but these books over here are not scriptural, we're not going to include them. So we know, scholars know that there are a lot more books and there's a lot more letters out there than are included in our Bible here. But there's a reason they weren't included in what's called the canon, or the list of books of the Bible. And one of those books is called the Proto-Gospel, or the Infancy Gospel of James. Are you still with me? A few glassy eyes, like, let's get to the point of the sermon here, Mike. Okay, we're getting there, don't worry. So the Infancy Gospel purports to tell the story of the miraculous birth of Mary. What? The miraculous birth of Mary? This book tells us that her parents, who are named in this proto-gospel, by the way, anybody know the traditional names of Mary's parents? Probably not. There is a church in Fargo named Saints Anne and Joachim. Anne and Joachim, that is from this proto-gospel. That's supposedly the name of Mary's parents. Again, if you're on Jeopardy next week, you're good to go. So according to that, Anne and Joachim, they were older, they were without children. Anne miraculously finds herself with a child, even being past childbearing years. So does this sound familiar to some other Bible stories that we might know? Abraham and Sarah, right, with Isaac. A couple other in the Old Testament. We can also compare it to John the Baptist, Elizabeth, and Zechariah. Mary is then raised in the temple. What? Mary's raised in the temple. She's seen to be so especially holy. She's seen to be set so holy and set aside by God for an important task. She's raised in the temple. When Mary is older, when she's old enough to have children, she's old enough to be considered a woman, so she can't stay in the temple any longer. So she is betrothed to an older man, a widower who already has children from his previous marriage. His name, Joseph. And in this version of the story, Joseph seems to be more of less of a husband and more of like a fatherly caretaker from the sounds of things. And there's so many other things in this account as well. There's some really odd to creepy things that go on in this. But basically it says that before her encounter with the angel Gabriel in Nazareth, Mary was already considered special. She was already considered set aside by God for a holy task. Now, if you want to read the entire book, you can look it up online. It's available for free online. It's an interesting read. But remember, there's a reason it's not in the Bible. Keep that in mind. There's a reason it's not in the Bible. And so I believe, though, that in reading this is where this veneration of Mary comes from in certain denominations, because according to this proto-gospel of James, she was set aside from birth. She had a miraculous birth herself. She was already special before she became a teenager and God said, hey, I have this job for you. Now, I have a couple problems with this story. Just a couple. First of all, this account, this proto-gospel, was likely written in the 2nd century. So we're talking 100 to 150 years after the time of Jesus, which that's concerning, but also consider that the Gospels we have in the Bible were written 30 to 50 years after the life of Jesus. The oral tradition of that time was strong. It wasn't the telephone game, Purple Monkey dishwasher telephone game that we play. We could play that now, I guess. I could tell you something and it'd be totally different by the time it got over here. But oral tradition at that time was a lot stronger than what we might think it is today. And that's where we get our Gospels from. The biggest problem that I have, though, is that this proto-gospel, it's definitely written after our biblical Gospels, after our canonical Gospels. But Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, none of our Gospels mention anything that's in the proto-gospel. It doesn't fit together. In our reading today in Luke's Gospel, there is no indication that Mary is any more than just a small-town girl living in Nazareth. We read Luke 1, starting in verse 26. In the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. The virgin's name was Mary. The first thing we have here is our timeline based on the pregnancy of Elizabeth. And only later in our story will we find out Elizabeth and Mary are related. Then we're told that there's this woman, at this point, unnamed woman, a virgin betrothed or engaged to be married to a man named Joseph. And oh, by the way, her name is Mary. It almost seems like an afterthought at this point. Now, I want to qualify this by saying I am not expert in 1st century Greek writing. If you're looking for that kind of a pastor, I'm not it. But if Mary was miraculously conceived and set aside from birth with a special task to complete for God, wouldn't Luke have probably mentioned that? I would think Luke would have written something along the lines of, the angel Gabriel approached Mary, a woman that had been set aside from birth and raised in the temple for the task set before her, and told her that. Just this little addition would say, hey, this is the special Mary that we're talking about, but we don't get that. Saying all this, though, I don't want to suggest that we should minimize Mary's role in the story in any way. We should think very highly of her and what she did. I'm sure many of you know this, but how old was Mary at this time? Probably about 13 or 14 is probably our best guess in this. This comes from the practice, the normal age of betrothal within the Jewish community of the 1st century. Normally a girl would be betrothed, engaged to a man when she was about 13, and then, I'll get to that in just a second. She'd be engaged at about 13. And our translations of the Bible generally say Mary and Joseph are engaged to be married. Remember, when we read the New Testament, it is a 1st century document or series of documents written to a 1st century audience, right? So we need to understand it as it would have been understood 2,000 years ago. If we think of engagement like we do today, we don't get a proper picture of the relationship between Joseph and Mary. Today, an engagement can simply be broken off by one of the people in the relationship saying, you know what, I don't want to get married anymore. And that's it, the engagement's off. But in the first century, an engagement, really a betrothal is a way of putting it, it's a better word, it's already legally binding. So we already talked about this idea that a girl likely 13 or 14 years old would be betrothed to a man. The first year or so after that, she would still live with her parents. She's still a child, essentially, young girl. After about a year, she would then move in with her husband. They would officially be married when that marriage is consummated. So here we have 13-ish-year-old Mary walking around Nazareth, and some random dude appears in front of her. Greetings, you who are highly favored. Sounds like a great pickup line, doesn't it? Oh, maybe not. But 13, 14-year-old Mary is just, this person appears in front of her and starts telling her these things. And of course she's scared, and Gabriel says, well, don't be scared, it's okay. The angel says, you are going to have a baby boy. Now, Mary isn't stupid. Mary knows where babies come from. She took 7th grade health or whatever class she would have had at the time. And there are some people today, there's a lot of myths around Christmas, and a lot of people try to say, well, Jesus wasn't special, there wasn't this, there wasn't a miraculous birth, and you're going to hear a lot of that over the next few weeks leading up to Christmas. And some argue there's no miracle here. Some argue that the way we translate these words, that we can translate the word in the Greek here to virgin, but it can also be translated as maiden, or a young woman that's not yet married, or a young woman that has just been married. Another argument here is that the pregnancy occurs naturally. And that's actually what the angel is suggesting, that Mary will become pregnant when she and Joseph consummate their marriage. Let's look at that first argument, though, that Mary wasn't actually a virgin, that we have mistranslated these verses. Verse 34, New International Version translates it like this. How will this be, Mary asked the angel, since I am a virgin? NIV uses that word virgin to kind of keep things consistent in this part of our story. But what Mary says here, if we're to take more of a word-for-word translation from the original language, which is in Greek, is going to be something along the lines of, how can this be since I have never known a man? Or something close to it. Perhaps there are better words we could use in some of these other verses to translate. But here, Mary's own words are very clear that she has not been with a man. And with that, by natural means, she could not become pregnant. So that argument doesn't hold water. There's another argument here that some make, that Jesus is the natural son of Mary and Joseph, that she became pregnant after they were officially husband and wife, but that doesn't pass our sniff test either. Matthew's gospel tells us that when Joseph found out, what was his reaction? Was he like, oh, yay, Mary, I'm so happy for you, it's great, wonderful. That didn't happen, did it? His reaction is, I'm going to divorce her. The law, not just because he wants to and to save her from shame, the law requires him to do this at this time. So if Matthew's gospel tells us Joseph plans to divorce her, why would he seek a divorce with a woman that's carrying his child? He wouldn't. Obviously, he wouldn't. So those arguments about, well, we mistranslate this, and, well, they didn't actually mean that, they don't really hold up when we look at the story. The story, as we've heard it given to us over the last 2,000 years, makes a lot of sense, and it holds to what the story says. The angel says to Mary, you have this really important job to do. Mary needs to respond to this. We believe in free will. We believe we have the ability to say yes or no to God. So with that idea, Mary probably could have said, well, junior prom is coming up, and I've been dating this really cute guy named Joseph. Do you guys know him? He's really awesome. I love this guy. And I got this really cute dress, and, I just don't think it would look real good if I was pregnant, and I just don't think that would look great. So, with the dance coming up and everything, I'm going to have to say no. Thanks, though. She didn't say that, did she? What does Mary say to this? I am the Lord's servant. I am the Lord's servant. That's Mary's response. Let's not diminish the strength and bravery that Mary displays here. 13 or 14 years old, not married, about to be pregnant. How can she explain this to her family? How can she explain this to her friends? How will Joseph, her betrothed, respond when he finds out? Remember, his first reaction is, well, I have to divorce her. He knows where babies come from, and he knows he didn't have anything to do with the creation of this baby. What does that tell him? It says she was with somebody else, so he needs to divorce her. What will the public think? 14 years old, walking around. She's not married, but she's pregnant. What is the public going to think? People know how this happens. Now, one of the things that we love to talk about a lot of the time is you have a pregnant woman that's not married, so obviously she committed adultery, and adultery can be punished by stoning. Well, by the first century, this is a very, very, very uncommon thing within Jewish circles. Now, yes, there was our one story of Jesus coming across the woman that was about to be stoned for adultery. He says, let whoever is without sin cast the first stone. So here, there is that moment, so it does happen. But the chance of this happening to Mary at that time in history is actually really, really slim. But it's still a possibility. Knowing all of this, knowing all of these potential consequences, what could happen to her, what could happen to her family, how people will react to her, Mary's reaction is still, I am the Lord's servant. And this is precisely why God calls on Mary for this important task. He calls on her because she is faithful to God. And God knew what the answer would be. She sees the risk. She knows what could happen to her, but she accepts the Lord's calling anyway. Following the way of Jesus is not an easy thing to do. Jesus tells us to pick up our cross daily and follow Him. The cross was a Roman device of torture and execution. And we're supposed to carry this symbol with us. We're supposed to carry that burden with us every day as a Jesus follower. Jesus says the Son of Man has no place to lay His head. Jesus was homeless. Jesus was homeless. And following Him could mean that we too have to wander. As we look forward to Christmas, as we look forward to the arrival of our Savior, and as we anticipate His second coming, I ask that most important question to all of us today. Are you prepared? Are you prepared for that day? Are you faithful to God's calling like Mary was faithful to God's calling? This time of year and any time of year is a good time to think about salvation. Have you said yes to Jesus? Paul says, if you declare with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, believe in your heart God raised Him from the dead, you will be saved. Jesus said He didn't come to the world to condemn the world, but to save the world. That if we believe in Him, we will be saved. The question that's before you today is, do you believe that? The question that's before you this entire month of Advent is, do you believe that that baby that was born 2,023 years ago in a small little town of Bethlehem Was that really the Son of God? Did he really grow up into a man that taught about grace and love? Did he really go to the cross? Did he really die for our sins? And did he really come back to life? It's something every one of us needs to ask God and say, God, is this truth? And as we sit and we listen for that answer, I pray that that answer comes back to you as it's come back to me and to so many others, that yes, this is God's truth.